Yeah, good morning. So last session we discussed about Angular application, Angular application, and we learned about the application flow. Right? Application flow means how our Angular application starts. Actually, our Angular application starts with which file? Main.ts. Right? This main.ts will invoke app module. App module is actually app module.ts, right? In that, all library is configured, the library required for application. In that, one bootstrap component is defined. Bootstrap component. Bootstrap component default which component? App component is defined. So in this component, now this component is loaded into index.html. This is the basic process we learned. So the main and app module, bootstrap component, and in that component. So now we need to learn how to create our own components and build application. What we saw yesterday was creating an application which have already some components, and we modified that component HTML and we presented it. Now we will see in Angular, the first concept you have to learn is about Angular components. One by one, when we learn about every concept of Angular, we will explore and we will learn detail about architecture. What architecture and flow I have shown to you is not complete. It is just only the basic flow. Gradually, level by level, we are going to understand the complete application flow. Internally, how it happens and how it works. So in first, we need to understand about Angular components. Actually, when you look at general architecture of Angular, in Angular architecture, anywhere you will find only one basic architectural concept. So that is generally what happens. We have factory. Already I told you that factory is a collection of factory is a set of functions and values. Now a set of functions and values are configured in a factory. Now these factories are injected. These factories are injected into service. These factories are injected into service. So we usually have services. That means the factories are injected into service. We have a service. Lot of factories, lot of services will be there. Now we want to use an application. In that application, we want to use that service. Generally, what happens in the application, if you want to use the service, then directly we will not use the service. Actually, we design a component. So we design a component. So we create a component. So this component contains, it is representing a template with some sample functionality, design and everything. Actually, it is responsible for handling all type of interactions, data binding, event binding, all the techniques. Now, generally what we do is we inject this service into the component. So services are injected into the component, and this component is used in your application. So generally in your application, these components are used and they are presented on a page index.html. So on the client screen, user will have only one page. And on that page, he can view any component. He can change components. He can display multiple components. That is the reason this environment is a SPA. That means single page application, single page application. This is the basic architecture you will find about Angular. That means even in official website of Angular, you will find only this architecture. But internally, lot of things will happen, lot of application flow will be there, which you will learn level by level after understanding few concepts. So that means when you look at the official architecture of Angular, let's see the official architecture of Angular. Yeah. So the basic Angular architecture comprises of, yeah, this is the official Angular architecture. You will find everywhere, even in the official website. That means if you search for Angular architecture, you will find only this diagram every time. But we have seen a different concept yesterday. That is, clients makes a request. The request will be from particular host and port number, and the request will come to index. Index will main will use that. Those are all internal concepts. Like that complete architecture, you will able to understand at the end. At the end of our Angular, you will get complete clarity on its architecture. But generally, the basic architecture is this. The basic architecture comprises of this: module, component, services, values, functions. These are all called as factories. Factories are injected into service. Services are injected into components, and the components are delivered to you. How they are delivered to you, we will see. Directive, templates, and all those things. So in Angular, the first thing we are going to learn here is, to learn how to build an Angular application, we need to know about components. So in Angular, the first concept you have to learn components. So let's see Angular components. So what is a component? Actually, yesterday already I told you, component is components are building blocks for Angular application. Components are building blocks for Angular application. So a component comprises of three things: presentation and styles and functionality. So here presentation is designed in HTML. Presentation is designed in HTML. Styles are defined using CSS or SAS or less, like this. And functionality is defined using TypeScript. Using TypeScript, the functionality is defined. So technically, a component comprises of these three things. Actually, as I yesterday told you, that it is nothing special. Generally, components are there from JavaScript onwards. We have seen date component. So file upload component. You say input type file, input type date. They are all components. They are built with lot of markup, styles, and functionality. So here, actually, Angular allows to create custom components, and also and also and also provides predefined component library which you can implement and use. So component library called we call it as Angular material. It is a predefined component library. Angular material is a predefined component library. So Angular allows to create your own components, and Angular also have some predefined components. That means it have a ready-made component library. From the library, you can get the components and use them in your application. So that is Angular material. But in order to use the predefined components provided by Angular, first you must have a good idea on components. Then only you can use existing components. What is advantage of predefined components? It will reduce the time taken for developing an application, because ready-made design functionalities are there. You have to just implement and customize according to your requirement. Not only Angular material, you can borrow these components from a lot of third parties, but Angular material is free, provided by Angular team for components. Like you see material.io. So this is Angular material component library. This is Angular material. This is Angular material. So Angular material. Yeah. So this is Angular material official. This Angular material provides a collection of lot of components. When you go to the components, you can see left side, lot of components are there. Just like if you have learned already Bootstrap, you have an idea of components. Nav bars, buttons, cards, carousels, lot of components are present. What is, you can use Bootstrap here also. We will use that. We will see both. But advantage of material is it is built for Angular. So it will be more native than Bootstrap. Bootstrap also we have to use, because material is not enough. Material will not provide everything what you are looking for. That is the reason we need to use combination of both third parties and Bootstrap others. So components readily available. You can just use them in your project, or we can build a component. What is the purpose of component? Component allows to create reusable usable designs, or you can say reusable templates. Component allows to create reusable templates, so that we don't need to design every time. We can just design and we can use anywhere. You can use a component anywhere across projects also. That means it's not like you designed a component and you can use only for that application. You can use components across applications. In different applications, we can implement and use the components. So components are rich in presentation, logic, and functionalities, right? That is all component. Now, how to design components, how to work with components, lot of techniques are there. First thing is components are classified into two types. So based on their architecture. So, or you can say better, their documentation technique. Based on documentation technique, components are two types. We have inline components. and we have code behind components. Code behind components. We have inline components and code behind components. What is difference is actually inline component means inline component comprises of markup, styles, and functionality all defined in one file. Everything is defined in one file. So inline component means all the presentation, the effects, and functionality. Everything is in one file. Only one file will be there. What is good about inline components is if only one file is there, it will reduce the number of requests. And if number of requests are reduced, obviously page load time will improve. So initial load time will improve because it will reduce the number of requests. You already know that in web development, if number of requests are increased, then page load time will increase. So we can reduce the number of requests by creating inline components, and we can improve the page load time. But the drawback is they are not loosely coupled, hard to extend. It is not easy to extend. If everything is present in one file, separation issues will come. That means presentation, logic, and styles all are kept at one place. Then extending the component will be difficult. And another point is, so all mixed up at one location, they are called tightly coupled. So it is difficult for application for extending the functionality in further stages. So when you don't want any extensions, you want a stable functionality across any location, then you can better design inline components. We will see, practically we will see. So first we will see how to design inline components. So first, let's see the difference. What is code behind? Code behind components. Component comprises of so markup in HTML, styles in CSS, and functionality in TypeScript file. That means all are separated, clean separation of component. We will see both. We will see, then we will get a clarity on that. We will discuss the features and the drawbacks of them. Now, that is based on the documentation structure. They are classified into two types: inline and code behind. Actually, you can add components. In two ways again. Components are two types. You can add components in two ways. One is manually. So another one is by using CLI commands. We can add components in two ways. Manually, you can add a component, and you can use CLI commands. CLI commands advantage, I told you, scaffolding. That means you just run a command, it will generate everything required for you. Manually, you have to add everything manually, configure manually, right? We need to define. Let's see how. So we will see how we can create manually and how we can add through CLI commands. Let's see. So first, we are going to learn inline component manually added to project, right? So inline component manually added to project. How to add inline component manually? First, we will see inline component, how we can add manually. For this, you need to understand few basic things. That means, remember, component in Angular, in Angular, in Angular is a TypeScript class. Technically, component is a TypeScript class. It is a class. That means designing a component is designing a class. Already we learned in TypeScript the hierarchy. What is the hierarchy? We have contracts. From contracts, we have templates. So from templates, we have components. That module system already I explained to you. So technically, component is an TypeScript class. So that means we design like this: class and component name. So that is the component. That means component is a TypeScript class. We configure in this way. But how it behaves like a component? So that means how compiler understand that it is not an ordinary TypeScript class. How the compiler understands that this class is a component. It is not a TypeScript class. We designed a TypeScript class, but how Angular understands that it is a component, it is not a TypeScript class. Actually, component behavior is applied. Component behavior is applied to TypeScript class by using directive. Component behavior is applied to TypeScript class by using directive. And by using, you can say, by using the directive name is @component. By using the directive @component, it is a directive. What is a directive? So if anybody asked you a question in interviews, what is a directive, right? So directive is nothing but it is a marker. It is a marker used to configure any member in Angular application, so that compiler can understand the type of component, can understand the type of member, right? So the type of member compiler can understand. Actually, we can say marker. So it is a marker or decorator. So directives are markers or decorators. We call them marker or decorator. That means a directive is used to tell the compiler what kind of component it is, what kind of member it is. Is it a component? Is it a service? Is it a pipe? So how compiler understands about your component? You can say that actually it is that point. Another one, it comprises of metadata. It comprises of metadata. This metadata used by compiler to process the member. It comprises of metadata used by compiler to process the member. You design any member, and how Angular understands that it is a component or a service or a pipe, because in Angular everything is a class. Service is a class, component is a class, pipe is a class. If everything is a class, then how Angular knows that this is component class, this is service class? That is done by using decorators. We call them technically as directive. So we designed a class. So here syntactically, so now we designed a class. Here we are creating a class. class name, some component name. So we define some component name. Now, how it becomes a component? So we have to use a decorator at the top, component decorator. That is how we need to configure. So that means, remember, you should not end this. You should not end this. I am writing at the top just for clarity's sake. Actually, we write like this. We write like this. That means this is a component, and this is a marker which tells Angular that this class is a component. This is a component. So that is called directive. Traditionally, we have an habit of cleanly separating and showing like this. So actually, this is a continuous syntax, a continuous line. So that means this is the marker, and this marker is used for this class. And this is the component name. Actually, this component directive, so another important component directive is a member of Angular core library. So in order to use it, we have to first import. What we have to import? Component from where? From @Angular / core library. Then we have to use the component. And you know, in a module system, export. So we have to use class, and we have to define component name. That's how we design component. So that means this makes it a perfect component. But still, you mentioned that this is a component. But as per the component requirements, every component needs logic. That is already there. That means component is already having logic. Logic is defined inside the class. Where is markup? Where are styles? Where is markup? Where are styles? So component is having logic. That means now in this, because it is a class, you can have a property. In that, you can store some value. Because it is a class, you can have a method. In that, you can define some functionality. And because it is a class, it can have a constructor. Am I right? It can have a constructor. Because it is a class, it can have a what? It can have accessors. We can have a getter, we can have a setter. It can have accessors. Because it is a class, it can have all these. But where is presentation? But where are styles? So component is there with some logic, but where is presentation and styles? So the presentation and styles are defined. Presentation and styles are defined by using component metadata. That means every component have metadata defined as an object. Every component have metadata defined as an object. That means key and value. What is the metadata for every component? So many are there. Basic first we will see. First important, selector. We will have a selector. Selector is a string type. Another, we have template. Template is also string type. We have template URL. So this is also a string type. This is also a string type. We have styles. Styles is an string type array. We have style URLs. So this is also a string type array. It is a string type array. It can contain lot of things. Animations is an array. So this is an any type of array, because in that so many things will be there. Technically, lot of other details will be available inside the component. Now currently we are learning Angular 14, and from Angular 14 onwards, so components are standalone components. From especially Angular 14 onwards, components are standalone components. Before Angular 14, components are not standalone. Standalone means, so that means actually Angular 14 introduced standalone components. We call them standalone components. If you particularly mention that in resume I done Angular 14, then obviously you have to tell what is new in Angular 14. And one new feature added into Angular 14 about components is standalone components. That means before Angular 14, component services and modules are configured in app.module.ts. So before Angular 14, if a component have to use services, if a component have to use some modules, they are defined separately in app module. From there we have to use in component. But Angular 14 so allows to configure services and modules directly in a component. That means what you can do is add the net component. In that component directly here, we can configure. Additionally, we can configure providers. Providers are used for service. We can configure imports. Imports are used for modules. This is not available in the early versions of Angular. Early versions only from Angular 14, but Angular 14 not the initial release. Angular 14 developers release is currently available. In that release only this is provided. That means still it is not a complete stable feature. It is not a stable feature. But this is newly introduced into Angular 14. They are still working on this concept. So it is not a complete stable feature. So it is just released as developers trial, right? So developers can try these standalone components by installing a minor version, a small minor version you need to update, then you can try to use them. So, but by the end of the 14 version, so when next version comes, so we will get this as a stable concept, right? So almost it is available as a stable concept in the future releases. They are going to make this happen. We will see how we can use, but for that we need to know services and all. So what is new about component in Angular 14 is so standalone components, right? So first we will see, that means now you got a complete clarity here how to design a component. So first we have to, component is a TypeScript file. TypeScript file means we have to add a TypeScript file. I will give the name as home component.ts. You can give any name, it doesn't matter. But as per the traditions, For components, we use the suffix as a component. We use the suffix as component, but it's not mandatory because file names, anything you can define. Now, how to configure in this? First, we have to import. What to import? Component from which location? At the net Angular / core. After that, we have to define component decorator. In this, we need metadata. In this, basically, three things are very important. So we need a selector. Selector defines how this component is accessed and used in a page. So you defined a component. So, but how to access this component and use in the page? That is actually selector. For example, we have date. Then how to access date and display in page? We have input type as date. This is selector. This is the selector. So this selector is used for presenting that component. Similarly, what is your selector name? So as per the rules, every selector must have prefix app. It must have the prefix app and hyphen and any name that is home. This is our component selector name. That means your component name is home component, but how to access it and use in a page? By using this. That means now how to access this component anywhere? To access this component, so we have to access this app home like this. This is how we have to access the component and use. We can use in this way, or you can use as self-ending also. Self-ending also. That is how we can access a component and use. Okay. Now, when you access this component, what it should render? Presentation. Every component needs presentation. What it should render as presentation? That means this is selector, and what it should present, that is decided by template. Template indicates what markup to present. That means you can define here, you can define your markup. You can define your markup. What markup you want to present, that you can define here. That means this is nothing but, so presentation. Presentation. What is the output? Markup. So presentation markup you have to define in template. Remember, we are designing inline. Inline means everything is designed here in one file only. Suppose you designed markup in a separate file and we have to bring it and use it. Then we have to use template URL. Template URL. Currently we are designing inline, so template. First we will see inline. Okay. Next, important, if you want some effects, then we can use styles. In the styles, it is an array. So it is an array of what type? String type. Here we have to define, selector. Am I right? We have to use the selector and you have to define the effects. What effects you want? Selectors. Class selector, ID selector, type selector, descendant selectors. You can define the selector and multiple. That means again, you need to define a selector and what effects you want. You can define in this. That's how we configure the styles. Now, for any component, these three basic things are enough. One is selector, another one is template. Styles are optional. So template is mandatory, selector is also mandatory. Now export. So we have class and the class name is home component. And in this you can put any properties, anything you want. That is how a component is designed. Now component is designed, but how to tell the application to use this component in startup? Then what we have to do? To tell the application to use this in startup, you have to go to app.module.ts. In this, first you have to register your component. Whatever component you added, application should register it first. Where to register the component? Components are registered in declarations. We have a declarations arena. We have in app module, we have declarations, we have providers. So we have imports, and we have bootstrap. Am I right? These all are there. And your component need to be registered here, home component. Your component need to be registered in the declarations. After registering in declarations, then you have to set up in startup. Okay. How to set up in startup? We have to use bootstrap. Bootstrap should start with which component? Home component. Previously it was app component. Now you have to start with home component. But this is not finished. Why? Because you told that it should start with home component, but index is not using this. That means what you have to do, go to index.html. In index.html, in the body section, you have to access the app home component here. Understood? That is the selector. That is how it works. This is the basic approach how to design component, keep it in the startup, register it, and start it. Let's see how it works now. So this is all the process you need to understand if you want to manually do this, right? Let's see. So we will go to our Angular project and let's go to the Angular project. So file, I will open our Angular workspace here. So this is our Angular workspace. Now in this, yeah, so let's close all these things. Yeah. Now in this, where to add components, you know the location. All components are kept in which folder? App. We have to go to app folder, and I don't want to mix my components with others. Then I will simply add a new folder here. In app, I'm adding a folder called components. Okay. We will keep all our components in that folder. Yeah, it is added. The components folder is added. Now let's go into the components folder and add a new file. And I will give the file name as home component. So you can write traditionally like this, home.component.ts. That is traditional approach. You can give any name. So that is the component. Okay, but still it is not a component. It's just an empty module. So how to make this as a component? First, we have to import. So import and component. So from, so which location? Angular core, Angular/core, core library. From Angular core, this component is imported. Now we need to just use the component marker. Let's keep it initially with an empty object. And here we have export. So class and the class name as home component. In this, just I kept a title and the title contains suppose home like this. Suppose I say shopping home like this, I define some title. Okay, fine. Because in the TypeScript, they have given single quotes because you saw yesterday when we saw the TS config file, it says single quotes. Better we will follow that. Now here in this component, first is selector. We need a selector. And what is the selector? So selector is, we need to define the selector. So that is app home. That is the selector. So we need to configure app home as selector. Okay. So selector indicates what to use for accessing this component, right? The reference name. Okay. Next, after the selector, now we need to define template. Template is a markup. This markup can have some embedded dynamic things also. In that case, I will prefer using backtick because in single quotes or double quotes, I cannot use any dynamic. You know that. General string in JavaScript, single quote string, double quote string, and a backtick. Backtick allows embedded expressions. So here we have to define backtick, and here I will use a markup. I will create a heading, and in this heading, I will define. So this title I want to show. Then how you can bring that, use it here. Now, generally in JavaScript, the binding expression is $curly brace. That is the binding expression. In Angular, the binding expression is double curly brace. Angular data binding expression, JavaScript binding expression, $curly brace. And here double curly brace. Here I have to get the title and display. You can add so much into the markup presentation, whatever you want. You can write in multiple lines like this. I'm just writing in simple way. So I will put a paragraph. So, and here I will write some welcome to online shopping site, something like this, online shopping store like this. Now that is the basic thing I designed, template. Okay, that is ready. So we have configured the template. If you want, you can add what styles. But you see, while using itself, it will show you the IntelliSense that styles is a string array, and it question mark means optional. Optional. We know the meaning of those things. So, and it is a string array. That means it is a string array. Now in this, I will put a string. In that we will say wherever heading is there, for heading, we need to apply some effects. Suppose I said color as some red, like this I am defining. So that means color as red, like this I define. We can add multiple. You know how to add multiple. That means we need to put a semicolon. So we say text align. So text align as what the center, like this we define. If you want some effects for paragraph, then put another string. So wherever paragraph is there, we will put color as blue, something like this. That's how we configure the styles and define them. That's ready. Now our component is ready, but still it is not recognized by your Angular application. So let's go. We have to go to app module.ts, and in the declarations, don't delete existing, because you have to use all the components and design one application, right? So here, because it is array, you know how to do that. So comma, we will add another component. What is it? Home component. Actually, Visual Studio Code have IntelliSense. It will pick up and import that automatically. Otherwise, we have to manually first import and use it. That means what we have to do first, we have to import that component. So import, so from which location? From dot slash. In that we have app. In that we have components. In the components, home components. That's how we have to define. Right. And here, so because dot slash, because actually dot slash, because we are present in app folder. In app, come out of that folder and go to components. In the components, use it. It depends how you configure. Suppose I say here, you see dot slash, in that itself directly components are there, because components is present in the same folder where app component is there, app module is there. So you can use dot slash home components. Anything is okay. Both correct path you have to mention. That's it. Now we will write here. So home component. Then we have to declare home component. It's not done. Our application must start with home component. In Bootstrap, you can add this component also. But if you are adding Bootstrap 2 components, both components must be in index. That means what components you defined in Bootstrap, they must be in index. That means if you want your index to start with 2 components, then you put 2. Only one component, then remove this and put which component? Home. I want currently application to start with only one. Multiple we will see in the next levels later. Now this is ready. The component is there. Now after this, now we need to go to index.html. In index.html, we need to change the startup. It is not app root. It is what? App home. That is the component we need to define. So can we have multiple components? Yes, you can have. We can have nested components. We will see all of them. Initially ready. Now let's start the project. So we need to start the project. So some problem in my terminal. I will restart. Sometimes the terminal abnormally stops because of some issues in the loading of component. That's the reason, because it showed me a warning at the time of loading that terminal was killed. That's the reason I have to restart. Okay. So now once it is ready, all modifications we already saved that, right? Once it is ready, now let's open the terminal. And in the terminal, we need to start. It is taking a little while. I will do one thing. So because we have alternatives, I need to restart it. So instead of that, directly I will open this in command prompt. Here we can run ng serve project is equal to shopping. You can do in terminal. Currently my terminal is not ready and active, so I'm using this. Yeah, by the meantime, I will give here the process, what we done. So example, what we created is first, so add a new folder into app by name components, right? After that, second step, add a new TypeScript file, file into components. So the file name is home.component.ts. In that, let me keep all this logic. So in that, this is all the logic. Let's copy this. Okay, that is the second nine. Next, we have to go to app.module.ts. In this, we have to first import. We have to import the home component. I will just give only initial, right? And in the declarations, we have to keep that component. And in the bootstrap, we have to provide that component in the startup, right? These two things we have to do. This is not required, right? Keep that existing things, okay? Now this is startup. Next, one more work we have to do. Go to index.html, and in the body, we have to just replace app home, right? That is app home. That is how we need to configure. So this is the concept. Okay, so it is compiling. Replacing happens server side or client side. So it's like a joke now, right? This is a client side technology, Ashish Reddy. Why, what do you think server side? How you thought that it is server side? It is a front end technology you are learning currently. Everything is in the front end only, right? You have a local deployments, everything front end. You are dealing with a front end technology, not any server side technology. Already I told you commands, na? So that depends on how you create your application. Currently we are using workspace. That is the reason. Working with component is not finished, so don't worry about all the information about component, right? Lot of things. At least 1 week we will learn about components. Then by the end of components you will get a clarity on everything on components. So no hurry into questions about components. Just follow level by level, you will understand everything. It's taking long. Usually it should not take such long. I will once restart this. Yeah. some issue in my machine only.
Recording stopped.